Planetopijin podcast. Dobar vam dan, ja sam Vlasta, a vi slušate novu epizodu Planetopijinog podcasta. Velika nam je čast ponovno u Zagrebu ugostiti našu autoricu, Margrit Coates, koja je napisala više knjiga, od toga smo preveli Glas životinja i Komuniciranje sa životinjama. Margrit Coates je jedna od vodećih svjetskih stručnjakinja za holistički pristup terapeutskom radu sa životinjama. Svojim je pionirskim radom na tom području otvorila put za iscjeljenje životinja i postavila doista visoke standarde rada u tom području, što je jako važno. U Velikoj Britaniji, odakle nam dolazi, njezina empatija koju ima prema životinjama i sposobnost komuniciranja s njima postali su legendarni, a vjerujem i u Zagrebu za sve one koji su u nekoliko navrata dolazili slušati Margritina predavanja u Makronovi. Hello, Margrit. Hello again to Zagreb. It's wonderful to have you as our guest, and welcome to Planetopija's podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a joy for me to visit Croatia, especially Zagreb, where I have so many friends.
It was almost a love at first sight when you first came. It was several years ago, wasn't it?
Yes, it was love at first sight. This is my fourth visit to Zagreb, to the Makronova and Planetopija team. And it was like we'd always known each other the first time that we met. It was coming together of friends, soulmates.
I mentioned you are a renowned animal healer, world-renowned animal healer, and animal communicator. So could you explain a little bit about what does that really mean?
Communication, authentic communication with animals, with all species, so I'm an interspecies communicator, works on the same level as healing energy. So I don't approach an animal specifically to communicate. I'm always connecting with healing energy. I'm radiating healing energy. I do a lot of meditation and mindfulness to keep that strong within me. And when we operate on that level of awareness, because it's an energy to energy connection with another species, then we are also in an awakened state where we can hear the communication of animals. And of course, their language is very different to human language. They transmit information in a different way, but we can pick that up on that wavelength. So that's how it works for me. So I don't approach animals and ask questions. I don't have a list of questions, because I will say to people, how do I know what the question is? That's a very human, egoistic approach. So I allow the animal to transmit the information on whatever level the animal needs to do that. So when I'm working in a consultation, I said to people, I'm not going to go with a list of questions. I will just present myself and see what conversation the animal triggers. The way that animals communicate is very rapid in what I describe as a stacking situation. So humans extrapolate, they pull out a sentence, hello, how are you? When we're with an animal, that information is presented instantly. You don't need to ask, hello, how are you? Because the animal has already instantly, when you're open, given you that information.
What does it mean when you're open?
So what I mean by being open is that you have become resonant with all life, all forms of life. So humans are generally, as a species, quite closed down. They're going through their daily life, not noticing most things going on around them, very closed down. So when we allow ourselves to work on a higher level, then we are in what's called an awakened state, so that we are receptive to the life around us. So that's nature. We can walk through the trees and sense the energy resonance of the trees. You can meet a dog or a cat or a horse, and instantly you're hearing them. Instantly I'm hearing them, how they feel, where there's pain, what situation they're in. it's so that information is there. That information is being radiated by animals constantly, and we as humans can pick it up when we are working as a whole, as we've become a holistic being. I mean, we are animals too, and what humans do is forget that state. So humans become, in an everyday situation, closed down. But the way that I like to be is to be fully open to the whole of experience of all of the animals, all of the nature situations. And I think and feel very strongly that if all human animals became fully aware of the life around them, then the planet would be in a much better state. We could help a lot more. Awareness is peace.
So from what you're saying, I get this image that not only animals need healing, but humans as well.
So that's a really good point. Thank you for making that statement. As a healer, I often get students on my courses that say, I only want to be with animals. I only like animals because I don't like humans. And I always say to them, that's not a good place to be in, because, I repeat, we are animals too, but also we need to embrace the whole of life that we find ourselves in. And if we are with animals and we don't like humans, the animals pick up on that. And there's a lot of very destructive things on the planet. There's a lot of darkness, but there's a lot of light. And I think we can, by loving the people that we meet, and I mean that in a spiritual way, soul to soul, by encouraging other people to become more spiritually aware, to embrace their healing, innate healing, because everybody has the potential to be a healer. That's the great sense of empowerment for humans. You know, we look at animals and say, oh, my dog, my cats, whatever animal with, I feel good when I'm with them. They're radiating healing, but humans have that ability as well. Everybody has that ability to do that. And so coming back to your question, we mustn't ignore people. So that's what I'm saying to all my clients and to my students. Embrace humans. If you turn away from humans and feel dislike for humans, that isn't healing for us. It's not a healing situation. It doesn't radiate light. We need to look at the whole situation. And people will say, I like animals because they love unconditionally. Well, when did that become a statement for humans to make? We are able and have the ability to love unconditionally too. And that's something we need to get into the habit of doing, is radiating that light, that love, that sensitivity that animals radiate. I'd like to make the point, though, that not all animals are in the fortunate situation of radiating healing. You know, I see animals in very distressing situations. Recently saw some horses on the street, clearly very sick, very ill, being ridden in ceremonial situations. And I see this all around the world. I'm not pointing a finger at any country. My home country is something I don't like to see. So those animals can't fulfill the love that they want to give, because they become slaves to humans. They're in pain, they're distressed, they're not living the natural lifestyle. We as a human have a responsibility to take care of the voiceless. And that's the burden that non-human animals have. We as humans have enslaved many animals on this planet for entertainment, for doing work, for supposedly making us look good when we're with them. And we need to stop doing that. And when we stop doing that, then we are able to radiate that unconditional love.
You mentioned several points I would like to go back to in this conversation because they're very interesting. But first, you mentioned that we are all able to be healers. There is this capacity innate in us, but we should, I guess, work on it and practice it. At the same time, I feel, from what I know, it's very important for someone to be a healer, certified that the standards should be high. It's not like, oh, I went through one course and then I can heal others. So could you talk a little bit about the standards that you've set? Because it's an area that has been developing throughout the years.
So I come from the UK, and we have a system where people can become registered healers. I'm a spiritual healer. I don't practice Reiki healing. Reiki healing is another offshoot, a Japanese system. So we go through a minimum of 2 years of studying with a healing organisation, to the point where we then take a registration, we have insurance to practice, we follow a code of conduct. And I then went on to join the British Register of Complementary Practitioners because of the amount of time that I've been a registered healer, which is a very long time. And the work I've done, I'm now on that register as a senior practitioner. So those are the people that we direct. That's the direction that we would send people to if they're looking for healing. There are various organisations that follow that system, and it's very strictly controlled. The people teaching have qualifications in teaching as well as being healers. And of course, there are lots of people who say that they're healers and they set up, and there isn't really any regulation to stop that. But I always say to people, those people may have an ability, but if someone belongs to an accredited organisation, you know that someone has them on a register, someone knows who they are, and they have to follow this code of conduct. So that's how I started with that organisation. But going back before then, from when I was a child, I knew that there was something more to this life than what was visibly seen around. And I was always compelled to go to people and touch them if I sensed that they were unwell or troubled. And people would say, you know, you're a strange child, you've just put your hand on my hand, or you stood next to me and I feel better. And I just thought it was something completely normal that everyone could sense when there was a need to help, could sense the troubled, not just the animals, but the people, and that you could actually help by standing close and wanting to help them, radiating some thoughts of peace, of assistance, of love, I guess, as a child, without being able to identify that. And I'm talking about a healing love, a spiritual love, as opposed to a physical love. And in the way that animals operate, they want to help, they radiate that peace if they're allowed to. And we've talked about the disastrous lives that many animals are forced to exist through human domination. And so then I was in another career for many years. And when I came out of that line of work, I decided I would go back to my healing roots. And I retrained in many other areas of complementary therapies, so that I opened my own clinic. But it was the clients that came to me that said, I feel really a benefit from the healing. Will you come and see my dog or my cat or my horse? And it was at that time that I realised that there wasn't one book in the world written about healing for animals. So this was 1998. No one had thought to take the topic of healing to animals. No one. And I researched at the university library to see where I could find information. And all I could find was a sentence in a book about human healing that said, maybe you could try this with animals. So I decided I would write a book. And the first book was Healing for Horses, which was the first book in the world on this planet about the topic of spiritual healing for animals, in this case horses. That was followed by a book, Healing for Pets. It was, I was very privileged to be in that time, to be able to pioneer this topic. And it was a strange time because it was the first book, Healing for Horses, was a huge shock to the horse world. I had some orthodox journalists write scathingly that I had called horses spiritual beings, that they had a soul, that they had a voice, and that when we tuned in, when we allowed ourselves to let go of all of our physical barriers, and we actually stood in front of them and said, "Who are you?" We could hear them, and we could hear them talk about their distress, their pain, as well as their joy, and as well as the times when they enjoyed what they were doing. The book became a #1 bestseller, and for a long time on Amazon, incredibly, it was the #1 in veterinary science, even though it's not a veterinary book, and not really a scientific book. And it was translated into many languages, and I started travelling the world after that book, and I'm still travelling the world. But what was amazing was, and humbling, is the ripples. That book was a stone thrown into the universe, and the ripples are still ongoing. People are still buying that book. I'm still being contacted. It's still changing lives. So I think for me as a healer, it comes back to imagine if everyone on this planet recognized their healing potential. Imagine that everyone steps into the light. Imagine that everyone steps into their ability to love unconditionally, to radiate goodness. Imagine those ripples. That would be a tsunami of peace, of joy, of understanding and awareness, so that humans would then be able to turn away from being lost as a species, because as a species the humans are lost. We're completely focused on things that are irrelevant and damaging and harmful.
You've described how people were a bit shocked when you wrote your first book, and just this idea of animal having a soul, I assume it was almost offensive to some people.
Very much.
Has that changed, and are you happy with the progress?
I'm so happy with the progress, because not only has it changed, it's changed beyond my wildest dreams. At the time, there were young women in their teenage years who took that book and contacted me from around the world and said, "This book has touched me, my heart, my soul. I see horses in a different way. I read this book and the book spoke to me, and I knew the truth in this book. I can't describe it, but I knew it." And I've kept in touch with many of those young women and some males as well, but mostly it's a sort of feminine, there seems to be a feminine movement. And I encourage those people to take the topic into science. So what we have now is a group of science university graduate behaviourists with the Foundation of Healing who've brought the truth of horse behaviour to the world on a spiritual level. And so for me, that was an incredible thing that happened. And they're now teaching authentic behavioural science. This isn't some cowboy in a ranch somewhere throwing horses around a round pen. This is authentic who are horse stuff. And it's all around the world. Yeah, and my books have gone all around the world, and the Czech Republic is now translating that book into their language. And so that was an amazing thing. And then, you see, I wrote that book. It came to the market in 2020. No one in science had spoken about who are animals. In 2014, I think it is, Carl Safina, brought out a book. He's a ecologist and a scientist, an American, brought out a book, and for the first time he shocked the science world by saying that we should say to animals, and he said to animals, who are you? So this came after I wrote the book Healing Forces, where I'm saying we should say, who are you? So I like to think that somehow the ripples in the consciousness of the planet has reached the scientists, because we have Frans de Waal, the Dutch-American ecologist, bringing out similar books. We have Carl Safina, we have other scientists. The books are coming out now where the scientists have stepped into that arena to say, actually, they are very much like us. We need to say, when we're with animals, not what are you, but who are you? So for me, if I step back and look, those books were a watershed. Once you throw something out into the universe, it always starts a ripple. So the ripples have reached far and wide. And I think they will continue to reach far and wide until we stop using animals as slaves. That's what's happening all around the world. So there's no more performing animals. We stop having ceremonial horses. We stop having treating animals with disrespect. And we stop eating them, and we stop the factory farms. We stop the disrespect because we say, who are you? And in that question, the answer is, I am you and you are me.
You worked with horses, pets, cats, dogs, rabbits, but also wild animals like elephants. By wild, I mean those who belong to wilderness, but they're enslaved. And I know from many of your lectures that I've heard, which are really touching and emotional, that you have so many stories. Is there one that now comes up to your mind that you would like to share?
There are so many stories, but I'd like to share the one about Anne, Britain's last circus elephant, because it's reflective for all of us. Because, you know, there are lots of dog stories, lots of cats. That's the main, horses, dogs, cats is the main clientele base. But I met Anne, Britain's last circus elephant, and there are elephants and wild animals like her all over the world in captivity. So she was taken after TV footage of extreme cruelty was exposed on our national media to a wildlife park. And she was at the time about 56 years old. The wildlife park promised that they would bring in another elephant. That situation has never happened. So I was called to meet Anne shortly after, actually 10 days after she arrived at the wildlife park. The experience was intense because as soon as I stepped towards her, you just could hear this person calling for help. You could hear this person sobbing. This person had been taken from the wild when she was 3 years old. The herd had been killed to take the baby. If you want performing animals, you have to break their spirit when they're babies. You can't do it to an older wild animal. So they took her, they broke her through cruel methods. Unfortunately, performing animals are now banned in the UK. But I was overwhelmed by the sadness. And I reached out and touched her and I said, I'm here. I offer you healing energy. I apologise for being human. I apologise for the human species. But whatever I can give you, whatever I can offer you, let me help you. And she turned her head and tears sprang from her eyes and ran down her face. And this was witnessed by a vet standing there, by the keepers, by other people. And it was devastating and appalling that this ancient being, and elephants, whales, the great apes, are ancient beings on this planet, that humans have become so destructive, so mean-spirited, that they could allow this to happen, that they could go to see performing animals, that the people working in the business would work there and would allow it to happen. Because if humans stop allowing these things to happen, they will stop. And then I did the full healing session. And she then was let out into a paddock. And what she did then was extraordinary. She stood and looked around, and one of the toys that they'd given her was a tyre, a tractor tyre. And she went towards this and she started moving it around with her trunk. And then she became violently angry. And she took this tyre and for about 15-20 minutes she smashed it and she threw it. And she tried to stuff it and push it through the bars of the elephant enclosure. And she became more and more agitated, and eventually the tyre got stuck between the bars. She stepped back, she charged forward with her head, and she smashed it through the bars to the other side. And then she stood, exhausted, spent. And I knew that the tyre was a surrogate for all of the years of imprisonment, incarceration, loss of the herd, being forced to perform stupidly, cruelly, that she'd, as a surrogate, used the tyre to throw this out of her life. And the vet that was watching came to me and actually said these words. He actually said to me, I've watched a release. The intelligence of this creature, that she has this thought process, that she could think along these lines. Hitherto, the scientists would have said, only humans can plan this in this way. But she did, and it was witnessed. And then she came and I stroked her trunk. She went and she just peacefully threw dust around her body. To myself and to a lot of other campaigners, it's very distressing that the wildlife park didn't fulfill their promise to bring in a companion, because increasingly now, and there's a recent study, elephants must not be kept alone. They are herd animals. They suffer mentally, emotionally through being alone. In effect, she's in a prison. It's a good prison, in inverted commas, compared with being in the circus prison. But she's alone, and that should never have happened. There should be no wild animals kept away from their herd situations. It should be better managed, because that energy, all the people who drive in every day now to look at that elephant don't understand, don't appreciate. They're receiving sadness, distressing unhappiness. So what we create reflects back on us, and that isn't good for us. We need to understand as a species that we have to create better situations, because that is more beneficial for us. That in itself becomes a healing situation. By creating distress and selling it as an experience, come and see this elephant or this horse or these wild animals, and they're unhappy and distressed and not fulfilled, putting humans into a situation where they're in a place of unhealthy. Because we are energy beings, so we absorb energies. Until that stops, it prevents humans also from living the best life we can.
I wanted to ask you if you've encountered a wild animal in the wilderness and how different that encounter was.
So I'm really pleased you asked me that. That's a great question. I went to teach in Canada several times, and one day I had some time off. My husband and I took a drive into a wildlife park somewhere near Banff. And because Canada is a huge country, huge open spaces, and we'd been, you're not allowed to walk around when you're right in the wilderness areas, because the wild animals are everywhere. So you have to log into the warden's area, and they give you a map where it's safe to go, where you might be able to park, walk. So we'd driven along this track for maybe an hour, not seeing anything. And we parked up, and so there's this huge wildness around. And then I said to my husband, look, there's a dog. It just came down from an area where there was some bushes, and it started walking, and it looked like a German Shepherd dog. And it walked purposefully straight towards our car. And the closer it got, the more I realised it was a lone grey wolf, a male wolf. And he just kept walking. I couldn't grab my camera because it was on the back seat. Neither of us wanted to make movement. We just wanted to be still. And sometimes the experience isn't about recording it on a camera, because you miss the moment. The moment you take the photograph, you've lost that moment. So we just sat in the car very still. And he came purposefully close and closer. And as he reached the car, walking alongside, he paused and he looked in and he made eye contact. And I looked into those eyes, and the communication was so incredibly different compared with Anne the elephant, because he was wild and free, fulfilling his destiny as a wolf. And in that moment when I made eye contact with the wolf, I felt extreme joy, and I felt a sense of wisdom. I realised that this wolf knew everything about the universe because of the way he lived. He knew everything about the cosmos. I could sense that. The wisdom is very difficult to describe in human language, because it was wisdom all-encompassing. It was a knowingness. It was like being part of the universe. He wasn't restricted by anything human. He wasn't heavy by the baggage of humans. And there was this incredible sense, and it happened in a split second. It was just making the eye contact, and it was there. And I remember thinking instantly, you know everything. And it was like looking into the eyes of a wise being. He wasn't just a wolf. He was a being as well as a wolf, if that makes sense, if I'm describing it in the best way I can. And it was an incredible moment. And then he turned his head away and carried on loping with that wolf stride off to wherever he was going. And that was incredibly special. I've often, when I've been out and about and been places, met wild animals and enjoyed that presence very, very much, that sense of identity, sense of spiritual awareness.
I can imagine how so many of us would be happy to be living like that wolf, meaning fulfilling our destiny and purpose as human beings. That's one of the teachings of the animals. It's maybe not like a specific message per se for a person that an animal has, but just to witness someone living free, living what he or she should be, is very powerful.
It is extremely powerful, and that's why it's even more destructive at humans when we disrupt that type of lifestyle. And people should make no mistake, the disempowerment for humans through disrupting life, through disrupting the balance of nature, through disrupting nature. There is a huge disempowerment that we then have to struggle through. And you know, we see it all around, the junk, the stuff that humans are sucked into. And, you know, exactly what you say, that beauty of being born and being free to follow the moon and the stars and the seasons and to understand it and to have that simple yet very profound life is joyous. And I'm very envious. As a human, I'm very envious of living in that way. And so I've spent a lot of time, and I still spend a lot of time because I live in a national park in the UK, walking amongst the animals and watching them in the garden that we have. We have wild animals come. And that is something people need to embrace more and more, and to be campaigners for freedom.
One thing or practice that can help for sure is mindfulness, and you've incorporated that into your work with animals and with humans, if I'm not mistaken.
So the interesting thing about your question concerning mindfulness is, for me, it was always part of my work without me giving it that label. So because I've been working as a healer all of my life. And then mindfulness became more and more fashionable, became into the mainstream. And I looked at everything I was doing with animals and the humans, my clients, and I thought, well, this is all about mindfulness, but slightly in a different way. The lessons from the animals are presented in a slightly different way. And it's one of the books that Planetopia has published, The Voice of Animals. So I was always doing this type of work and always focusing on the mindfulness aspect without actually using that term. And then in recent years, when it became a really hot topic, I thought, well, maybe I need to investigate a course on it so that I can fully understand that topic in a deeper way. And of course, when you're training in mindfulness, there's a lot of psychology involved. So I actually took a formal accreditation to become a mindfulness teacher and practitioner. So there are 3 schools of mindfulness in the UK, and I trained with the one that involved a little bit of spirituality, because a lot of the original teachings of mindfulness stem from Buddhism. And the course I took had some of that aspect. One of our tutors was a Buddhist monk. And I found that really fascinating because it added another dimension. It gave me a greater understanding of humans, not of animals, but of humans, and where they needed increasing attention. So it's been very helpful to be able to formally add that as one of the disciplines that I'm offering, that I'm now a mindfulness teacher and practitioner, as well as being a healer and an interspecies communicator. And it did give me extra insights. But what I've done is adapt the training that I had to take it more into a spiritual aspect, to take it further, wider into the healing arena. So my teaching of mindfulness has evolved. It's different to the normal classes that people go to when they go through the mindfulness structure, because I had to do that. You know, that's my arena. My arena is nature, animals, healing, working with energy. So I needed to adapt and evolve mindfulness to be in a greater sphere.
What's the most important, touching, relevant message or teaching from your work with animals for you? And the second would be, if you, as John Lennon says, imagine all the world and all the animals living life in peace, what would this ideal world look like?
There are a great many messages and teachings that the animals have given me. I go back to what I mentioned earlier, one of the phrases, to say to animals, to say to people, who are you? And allow that information to come, because then we pose that question not from a place of arrogance or of superiority, but simply from a place of soul to soul. That allows us to receive that information in a place of neutral. So we blend. The main message from animals is to remember we're soul beings, and they are a soul being. That is hugely overlooked. The first lesson from science, from physics, is that everything's energy. The second law of physics is you can't destroy energy, you can only convert it from one form to another. Humans have forgotten that first and foremost they are beings of energy. We cannot destroy energy, so our being of energy, our individual energy state, is perpetual. We're here in a human form, we're here in this body. I know from my work and from the work with animals, that doesn't end at the time of physical death. So if humans started focusing on their permanence and saying, actually, I will always exist somewhere in some form, and I've experienced that, as I say, through my work. That's a fact, a reality. I am permanent. Now, let's wake up to that fact that I'll never get away from my permanence. It will either haunt me or it will bring me great joy, and I will elevate with that sense of permanence. And my resonance, our resonance, will be greater. The light will increase, the light will expand. That's something I know for a fact from my work. So there's something to recognise, our permanence, and to be aware of that and to do something with it. And how, the John Lennon thing, how would we see the world? We would have the world is the state of energy, the world, the planets are in a state of permanence. Then we would have humans who are resonant, full of light and spiritual awareness, creating a utopia. And that's where we are supposed to be aiming for, and where it's going horribly wrong. So we would look at everything being beautiful, everything being in harmony, and everything coming together as one piece of love.
Dear Margaret, thank you so much for this most inspiring and wonderful conversation. It was, as are your lectures and your books, very important and touching. And I wish for you to have many more years of your transformative work and this wonderful invitation to step into the light while we are here on this earth together with all the beings. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vlasta, for sharing this time with me. It's a joy and a pleasure as always. Bless you.
Dragi slušatelji, hvala vama. Nadam se da ste uživali ovoliko koliko smo i mi uživale. Svakako, Margritin poziv i poruka je da živimo u harmoniji, da otvorimo naše srce prema ljudima, prema svim drugim bićima s kojima dijelimo ovaj planet. I zašto ne, budemo dovoljno odvažni i smijeni da nešto što nam može izgledati kao utopija pretvorimo u stvarnost, a to je harmoničan, miran i sretan svijet. Do novog slušanja u novoj epizodi Planetopijinog podcasta. Srdačno vas pozdravljam.